I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Frank Sileo back to PKRG-TV as part of our well-being series. Dr. Sileo is a licensed psychologist and the founder and executive director of the Center for Psychological Enhancement in Ridgewood. An award-winning author of over a dozen books and an active public speaker, he has addressed wide-ranging subjects, including bullying, self-esteem, coping with chronic illness, and the psychological aspects of Crohn's disease. Welcome, Dr. Sileo.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me back.
Today, we are going to focus on an epidemic, but not exactly the one you might be thinking of. An epidemic of stress and anxiety. Can you help us to understand what stress is and what anxiety is and how they impact a person's health and functioning?
Sure. A lot of people will use stress and anxiety kind of intermingled, and they are separate and they are different. They're kind of kissing cousins, so to speak. Stress is a response to an external stimuli, such as someone is taking a test, someone has to go for a medical procedure, a child has to have a shot. So we're going to experience stress, but stress usually stops being experienced when that event is over. Anxiety, on the other hand, is more persistent. So even after that event is over, even after the test is done and the medical test or the exam is finished, that they still have persistent feelings of anxiety. So stress can be shorter lived. Anxiety is more long lasting. And stress and anxiety greatly impacts our health, not just our psychological health, but our physical health. How? It basically attacks and can attack our immune system in the sense that it makes us more susceptible to illnesses. So it lowers our threshold for immune responses, and it can make us more prone to getting colds and flu and other kinds of illnesses and create other kinds of diseases. So it is really important that you're highlighting this topic today, because people just think of how stress and anxiety might affect you psychologically, but it also can affect you physically as well.
Because there is that mind-body connection, and the brain is part of the body.
Correct. We
Right.
are connected there.
Yeah. Why do you think we're presently seeing an increase in anxiety symptoms in the population? Because I understand that I'm experiencing it. Everyone I know is experiencing it, and in young people in particular.
Anxiety was the number one mental health concern prior to the pandemic, before lockdown. And it has been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown and the anxiety about what is our future going to be like. Part of it was also exacerbated by the election and the events on January 6th. So it's really, kind of been ramping up for kids and adolescents, and it still remains, and adults, it also still remains the number one mental health concern in this country.
How do you, as a therapist, approach treating someone for anxiety when the condition is a response to a real world situation, which it is? Because I also understand that sometimes people have an anxiety disorder or an anxious personality, but now we have that, which is a possibility, and we have these real world things.
Yes, lots of people are coming to my office right now and are receiving like the diagnosis of an adjustment disorder with an anxious mood, because they're adjusting to something in their lives. And in this case, it might be, re-entry into the world. It might be dealing with, vaccinations. It might be returning back to school, socializing. And so, mental health professionals right now are being inundated with calls from kids, parents of kids and adults looking for services because everyone is feeling this state of anxiousness. Sometimes they can't put a name on it. Sometimes they just are feeling irritable. And understand, with children will experience anxiety or show anxiety symptoms sometimes differently than adults. They'll show it in a sense of irritability or acting out behaviors because they can't really put a word onto what they're experiencing. And so it's important that people are reaching out for help. And I'm glad to hear that, in the sense of that people are not stigmatized by calling a mental health professional and saying, I'm struggling, or I need help, or my child needs help. And so there's lots of ways to treat anxiety, ranging from, just, a reaction to something, to phobias. A lot of children and adults are struggling with obsessive compulsive disorders, where obsessions are thoughts, compulsions are behaviors such as hand washing. And that has been all ramped up due to the pandemic, where we were frightened about, and still are maybe, to virus and germs and being infected and getting sick. And so there's lots of tools that psychologists and other mental health professionals can give to kids, can give to adults, to help them cope with whatever it is that they're struggling with, whether it is adjustment to back to school, adjustment traveling back to work, commuting to work, being around people again, where people haven't been around people for quite a bit of time. And so we haven't yet seen the true, I think, ramifications of COVID-19 from a mental health perspective. I think we're starting to see that. The CDC just did a survey amongst kids, and they found that a third, or 30%, 37% of high school students in the United States experience poor mental health as a result of the pandemic. And I think that those numbers are not 100% accurate, because there's underreporting of people who are struggling with anxiety and stress and other kinds of things, that including suicidal thoughts, eating disorders, cutting behavior. We're seeing an exacerbation of all those kinds of behaviors and problems as a result of pandemic and other factors.
So some of these existed beforehand, but they were brought to the front because of the pandemic that we have been through and all the other unprecedented times. And I know we use that, we're going through unprecedented times, but I think now we are truly going through things we haven't seen before. So also anxiety is a well-known symptom of post-COVID syndrome. Are you seeing that? And when you see it, how do you treat this kind of physiological cause of anxiety?
Okay, so I think that when patients come to my office, whether they're young patients or they're adult patients, is that I practice from a cognitive behavioral perspective. What that means is, okay, cognitive is working on one's thoughts. Maybe they are a very black and white thinker. If I'm not a complete success, then I'm a complete failure. Maybe they're a catastrophizer, that the world is going to fall apart. And everything in their world is always a catastrophe. And they always think that way, without any evidence that there's, proof to what they're thinking about. So the therapist's job is to look at how one tells oneself about something. So, the expression, you are what you eat, you are what you think. So if you think scary thoughts, you're going to feel scared. If you're going to feel sad, if you're going to think sad or depressing thoughts, you're going to feel depressed. So the psychologist and mental health professional's job is to look at and help the person look at how they're thinking. What are they telling themselves? The behavioral aspect of the treatment is learning relaxation techniques, learning mindfulness practices such as meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, eating mindfully, doing other things mindfully in your life, and combining the cognitive and the behavioral aspects of things. So lots of patients, some adult patients, are now increasing their eating as a result of being home, or have increased their drinking behaviors. So that was the go-to, maybe, to cope with the anxiety that they're experiencing. So my job is to help them look at their thoughts and see how productive they are or unproductive they are, and how that is impacting their feelings and their behavior. And the research has really backed the cognitive behavioral approach for anxiety and depression, although we're not talking about depression today, is that the research is very, very salient regarding these two diagnoses of anxiety and depression. And so I encourage people who are watching, first of all, don't diagnose yourself. If you have any questions about yourself or your child, reach out to a mental health professional and speak to someone, speak to your medical doctor. your pediatrician, and any concerns that you have, because we often fall into the game of diagnosing each other and ourselves. So if you're concerned about yourself or a loved one, reach out and speak to a professional and let them decide what the best course of action might be for you and your family.
Seems like you have a lot of tools that you can go to help children feel less anxious when they're in these unprecedented times. When there's been an increase in serious illness and death as well in the past years, and a lot of unpredictable things, which is a real life situation caused by the pandemic, caused by political conditions. How do you help children feel less anxious when responding to real world situations?
I think it's really important when you're working with children, whether you're a teacher, a therapist, or a parent yourself, is you need to look in the mirror yourself first. And we need to say, okay, how am I handling the situation? So when I'm working with children, I'm also working with the parents, because if they're keeping the news on 24/7, or they are showing posts on social media, or they're just talking about it incessantly in the home, they have to understand that there's some sort of trickling effect there, and that it may be impacting their children. Sometimes I'll hear like, oh, they're not paying attention, or they don't really know what's going on. They do, because they may not hear it or see it, but they are hearing it and seeing it, because they're hearing it and seeing it in other places as well. But they can also feel that something is maybe not right. All of us have walked into a situation where maybe two people were arguing, or there was tension at a workplace or tension somewhere, and you can just tell something's not right here. And kids know that. And kids will often say to me in treatment, like, I know all about this. My parents don't think I know, but I know, and they see it. And so we need to be very cognizant of us and how we handle this situation. You mentioned earlier about, watching the news, whether it be about the COVID numbers, and, you would watch the news and there would be how many new cases, how many deaths. It was very jarring to watch that day in, day out. And now, like, whether the news is about school shootings or the news is about the war in the Ukraine, that those images can be very damaging to all of us, never mind just children, over time, inundated with that negative news cycle. And so when I'm working with children, it's helping them deal with transitions, back to school. I've done a lot of work with kids as the schools opened up. Now they're back in school. Now it's unmasking and learning how to be. Some of the kids I see, they've never seen their teachers' faces. They've never seen their friends' faces. They've never been in school because they started the pandemic in kindergarten, and now they're in second grade, and they've never had to deal with school before. So a lot of separation anxiety from mom and dad and from other caretakers, but dealing with transitions, learning coping mechanisms, tools. If, kids and adults need lots of tools. If you hire a carpenter to work in your home and he or she shows up with just a hammer, they're going to be a limited carpenter. So I need to find tools that speak to kids, whether it be breathing exercises, whether it be learning how to engage in other kinds of activities, limiting screens to some degree, limiting video gaming to some degree. Getting outside now that the weather is better, learning how to be a kid again, and learning how to socialize and setting up play dates and get-togethers with people, and learning to feel safe and engaging in those activities in a safe way. Routine and predictability is really important for all of us. And we had that disrupted 2 years ago. Our whole lives were upended. And, we're doing an interview today on Zoom. So, we've learned to adapt. And that's the wonderful, beautiful quality of human beings, is we are resilient. We can bounce back. And children have that resiliency and that grit, as it's called, to be able to bounce back, sometimes better than we as adults, because we have all that experience and all that, kind of maybe set in our ways a lot more. Kids are a little bit more flexible with that. And the more flexibility that we can teach kids and adults is the less anxious they will be. So when things don't go their way, instead of freezing and panicking and whatever, let's think about plan B. So teaching kids about other options and how can I speak to them? What is their language? What is something that interests them? What is something that we can tap into with children to help them decrease their stress and anxiety?
Well, even predating the pandemic, kids were more isolated than they were when I was a child. On the phone, I think not getting outside. I mean, when we first saw the pandemic happen, one of the wonderful things was I saw kids outside actually playing, and you heard the joyous sounds of kids in playgrounds, which I hadn't heard for years and years and years. So, and just from a personal experience, I hear what you're saying about the resilience of children, because just to reveal something about myself, it's not usually what an interviewer does, but my dad, he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was hidden in Berlin from the time he was 13 until the time his family escaped. And even though he went through that whole situation of being hidden, escaping from Berlin, he grew up to be an adult that was able to experience joy and had that resilience, actually more resilience, I think, than his parents did. But anxiety did remain a part of that, you know. But you know, right now it is nearly impossible for anyone to escape those images that we're seeing going on in Ukraine. And how should a parent respond to the questions about what people are going through?
I think, you know, you brought up a very good point, Lori, is I think that the word that is often used maybe in the professional community, maybe not so much in the lay community, regarding the pandemic and things we've witnessed on the, you know, watching television, whether it be the COVID numbers, whether it be the insurrection, whether it be, you know, the war in Ukraine, is that that's traumatic. And we've all been traumatized, maybe to some degree, by these experiences. Maybe not perhaps the trauma of maybe what kids and adults are going through right now in the Ukraine, but maybe little T's, maybe little traumas along the way. Maybe we've had a family member who passed away due to COVID. Maybe, you know, we've had, you know, traumas of other sorts. Maybe we have family members in the Ukraine and we're worried about them. And so trauma, like your dad's story that you know shared with us, you know, your dad went through some trauma, and perhaps his resiliency and his, you know, grit got him through that. So we need to kind of look at it that sometimes in that framework, that it's not just anxiety and stress, that it might be traumatic for children to witness some of the things that we see on TV, or we see on a social media post, or we see just on our laptops looking at the news there. So I think that when we talk to kids about the war in the Ukraine, is that, to your question, is that, again, I said earlier, we need to check into ourselves. We are their role models, and kids pick up on stuff. And it's not just words they hear, but the body language and the feelings in the room, as I said earlier. And the events going on can be confusing, not only for kids, but for adults as well. So it's important for us to gather some information so we can answer our children's questions. Okay, what's going on in the Ukraine? How do we explain this? You know, how do we anticipate questions for kids? And we want to be proactive. So check in with kids of what maybe they already know, because they do probably already know something, either from your home or from school or a peer. And this will depend, obviously, on their age and their developmental level. Even though they might be 8, they maybe sometimes are at a lower developmental level. Maybe they have a developmental disability, maybe they have autism. And so we need to take those factors into consideration. Don't presume what your child may be thinking or feeling. Also, don't minimize it. If they're talking about they're scared, don't be like, no, it's no big deal. It's, you know, it's over there. We don't have to worry about it here. Hear your child. Hear them say, I'm scared. What are you frightened about? Tell me, use open-ended questions. Tell me what you know about what's going on over there. Tell me how you feel. Tell me what you've heard. It keeps it open-ended. Younger kids may wonder about their parents or friends or themselves getting hurt. Ask them what they've heard. Teens, adolescents may want information on maybe protesting or whether there might be a nuclear war. And ask the team what their friends are saying and how they feel about it. Because with teenagers and adolescents, their friend group is very, very important for them. And they get a lot of their information from their friends. We want to share basic information, not the graphic details. We only respond to what they're asking. We give too much information, it could be quite overwhelming for them. And that could be overwhelming even for adults to give all this information. It's, whoa, how do you sift through all this stuff? So families with loved ones in the Ukraine and Russia may need to take extra time to discuss concerns around safety of relatives and their friends there. And don't assume that because your kids are talking about the events that they don't know of them. Again, we talk about address the pink elephant in the room. They're a lot more savvy. Kids are very tuned into stuff. When I sit with kids, I'm often, amazed how much information they know about things. When I was a kid, I was just wondering what the Saturday morning show was going to be and what sugary cereal was I going to eat for breakfast. So kids are a lot more aware because of just the media, just being a lot broader and just very, very accessible. We want to communicate, Lori, that kids are safe. Oftentimes, even when kids come to me, if they're afraid of burglars or a thunderstorm, is I always ask them, is your mom and dad or your moms and dads keeping you safe? Do you feel like because that's their job? Aside from putting clothes on your body and feeding you, their job is to keep you safe. And so some kids will say, yes, mommy and daddy or moms and dads keep me safe. Great. So they're keeping you safe. So that is their job. So we need to give them that job. Your job as a kid is to do well in school, have fun, have play dates, help out around the house. Maybe those kinds of things. Let mom and dad take care of those other things. We've got that. Military families may have increased worry about deployment, or maybe members of their family are already stationed or going to be, so that if you have it, whoever's listening, if you have a family member who's there, that may increase their anxiety about safety. Focus on the helpers, focus on the people that are doing the work there to help people in the Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. Focus on the altruistic behavior of others and encourage children here. What could they do to be helpful to other people? It goes without saying, Lori, that we should monitor media exposure. And that goes without saying. I'm not saying I think we can sometimes answer questions about the news without having them sit in front of a news channel or watch the news with you. Depending on the age, if you have a teenager, maybe you want to sit with them and talk through the news and the talking points there.
What if you have a child that is really aware of what's going on? And some of the kids that I work with, I notice that they really understand that they have the biggest stake in the future. And kids seem to be very, very concerned, I think, and sometimes more than adults, about the environment, because they know that that's going to be the environment they're going to have. There are certain kinds of kids who are very aware, and they are very concerned about that, as well as, this possibility of nuclear war. They might understand that Russia is a nuclear power, and that we're now hearing that these nuclear weapons could be used. In fact, I know that in Norway, they were giving kids iodine pills to the school children. Of course, that's Norway, that's close in proximity. But there are some kids that are really aware. How would a parent address those instead of dismissing like an actual fear of an actual possibility?
I think, again, it comes down to the age of a child. I don't think we need to talk to elementary school kids about taking iodine pills or about those things. I'm not so sure even at high school kids. I mean, if kids are in high school are curious about it, I mean, I would encourage them to research it or talk to you about it. Or, again, the parent may not have any knowledge about that themselves. So going back to my earlier point, they need to kind of do their own homework regarding those things. And families need to do what they need to do for themselves. If they feel more comfortable ordering iodine pills off of Amazon, if they feel comfortable, because I've heard that myself here, that people are ordering them. If they feel like that makes them feel safer, then they need to do what they need to do, what's right for their families. I think that there are great books for kids, for young children, about talking about how to handle the news and when bad things happen. If you Google or just look on Amazon, I'm sure you can find children's books on when bad things happen or tragedies, or ranging from school shootings to war to the pandemic. There's lots of great resources, and some of them are free. One of my publishers, Imagination Press, has a free book on COVID, and they just published a book on how to deal with the news in an effective way with kids. So I think sometimes reading is a great, for particularly young children, reading with them is a great way to kind of explain these difficult topics with kids, and fostering discussion about them. So after you read something, sitting with them, if they have any questions, you're there to kind of respond to those things, versus here, read this book and whatever and deal with it. That's not effective parenting. I think having an effective dialogue and being present is really, really important. I think that kids also, when the Ukraine war started, lots of my kids were very intrigued by it from a video game perspective, in that they were thinking of it from that perspective, and that kids think about things not really being real sometimes, and maybe that's their defense against dealing with the reality of war or the threat of war. And again, it's the parents' job to kind of talk to them about that in an age-appropriate way that is, kind of addressing some of those concerns in a gentle way. I wouldn't recommend talking to kids about these topics right before bedtime. Not an ideal time to talk about those kinds of things. And I think that we need to look at sometimes not what kids say, but how they behave, because action speaks louder than words with kids. And I think that some of the things that we need to look at when your child may not be doing well with something is look at sleeping issues. Are they sleeping? Are they getting up a lot in the night? Are they having trouble falling asleep? Are they regressing to a time when maybe they're now wetting the bed when before they had moved beyond that? So there might be a regressive behavior. We might want to look at eating behavior. Are they not eating as well as they used to? I mean, kids can be picky eaters, that goes without saying, but certainly maybe they were good eaters and all of a sudden they're not eating well. We want to pay attention to physical complaints. Are they complaining of headaches or stomach aches when there's no physical cause for that? We want to also look at changes in their behavior. Like I said, maybe they're eating too much, eating too little. As I said, I talked about regressions, like maybe they're like wetting the bed or toilet training. Maybe they're engaging in more sibling fights or fighting with you. Maybe their school functioning is not what it used to be. Maybe they were a good student and all of a sudden their grades have declined. Maybe they're having conflicts with peers, more so than usual. Maybe they're not taking an interest in going to activities such as scouts or sporting activities or dance classes. They might be showing you that they're struggling with something. And this may not have anything to do with the Ukraine. It just may be an indication to parents listening that maybe something is going on with your child and it's probably worth investigating. With teenagers, we want to, again, watch their behavior. Maybe they're starting to vape. Maybe they're starting to use alcohol. Maybe they're engaging in other types of risky behavior that they weren't before. So these are all kinds of red flags that we need as parents and caregivers to look at and say, what's going on here? Because kids won't come up to you perhaps and say, I'm depressed or I'm anxious, I'm scared. They will show you. And oftentimes irritability is, as I said earlier in the show, is an indication of perhaps stress and anxiety, but also could be an indication of depression. Kids don't show depression by crying all the time or sitting on the couch eating ice cream and watching, kind of just avoiding things. So they might be showing you things by being irritable. And it's kind of out of the realm of, they've been sleeping well, they've been eating well, they're physically healthy. Maybe there's something else going on.
So you've given me a lot of new ideas about how to recognize stress and anxiety, especially in kids. If a parent, how would a parent know when they can address this with their kids versus when they should seek the help of a professional?
Well, I think that, one of the greatest gifts we give to our kids is that open door and that sense of communication and trust between yourself and your child. And that doesn't necessarily have to be you as the parent. If you have concerns, maybe they're really close to an uncle or an aunt or a rabbi or a priest or a teacher, a coach, and someone that maybe a piano teacher, maybe could, that they feel very comfortable with talking to if you're having concerns and saying, I've noticed this, or I've been noticing this, kind of pose it as an open-ended question. Sometimes kids will be resistant and be like, no, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. Particularly a teenager will kind of push back. Sometimes that's where mental health professionals can be really helpful when you consult with them, and they can maybe give you the language to say to a child, like, I'd like you to try, talking to Dr. So-and-so, about this, maybe give it a couple of times, see how it is, and see where they're at with that. I'm finding, my phone and email has really been blowing up because people are needing services so much, and the kids are asking for help, which is a great thing.
Wow.
They're saying to their parents, I want to talk to someone, or I'm really struggling. And that is a real significant shift. In 27 years of practicing psychology, that's really a great change, and it's a positive change.
Do you think they're learning from their peers that they can have a professional that can help them with that?
They might be, and I think the schools are also kind of being pro mental health and advocating and putting, therapists in schools and talking to them about feelings and problems, and just it kind of normalizing things a bit for kids and not feeling like you have to be crazy to go see a therapist. I think that, that stigma is fading. And I think that kids are hearing it from their friends. Oh yeah, I go see Dr. So-and-so. Oh, I take this for my ADHD or whatever it might be. I think that there's some degree of normalcy with that. Just that on the topic of normalcy, I think that back to the tools of that, we need to keep structure and routine during these times of stress, is that we need some degree of predictability and a sense of normalcy. And that's why I'm encouraging people now to encourage play dates that are safe and encourage activities that you feel safe with, and kind of resume a sense of normalcy again, whatever that means to your family, whether it means
and exercise has to be good for stress.
Yes, putting phones away. Like, I can't tell you how many teenagers are looking at their phones late at night, and it's affecting their sleep. When we look at the basic stuff, Lori, like you just said, exercise, eating well, and sleep. Yeah, where everyone's like, yeah. But do we really? Are we mindful of those things? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we putting our electronics away? Are we eating well and nutritional? Like those kinds of things are the basic foundations that we have. And from that, we build on that. So I think that parents need to look at those things and say, are we taking phones away at night and putting them in a central location that kids can't text at 3 o'clock in the morning? Let's face it, texting and phones are interruptions to our lives as we're trying to carry on our schoolwork or homework or work or whatever that might be.
Well, I have learned a lot from talking to you today, and I have a clearer picture of how kids can be helped through these really challenging times. If some of our viewers want to reach out to you, how can they find your website to learn more about your practice?
Sure. My website is drfranksileo.com, so it's pretty simple. They could, on there, you have information about my work, the books that I've written, some media, when I've talked about different topics, or I've written about them, or been quoted about them. So there's lots of resources on my website to help parents navigate some difficult conversations as well as difficult topics. So they can go there. I'm on social media at Dr. Frank Sileo. That's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So certainly they can find me there, or if they want to phone my office, my phone number and my email is on my website.
Great. So that's where the contact information is. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being with us today and addressing this really important and timely topic. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you again. The last time I spoke with you, I felt like, wow, we're really kind of at this low point, and then things just got crazier.
Yes. And first of all, thank you for having me back. I always enjoy speaking to you and to others about these topics because we need information. Parents and caregivers need information and resources because they feel like they're alone in this, and you're not. Everyone, we're all in the same boat. We may be in different boats, but in the sense of rowing that boat, we may be ahead in some respects, but not in others. But certainly we are all together in this, and you are not alone.
That's a wonderful way to conclude our program today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.